Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm not in the shop but have a totally different kind of presentation today. We're tearing down a house and I recorded a time-lapse of the event. Thought it would make a cool little video. Now the time-lapse camera doesn't have a soundtrack, and if it did, it would just be sounds of machinery, traffic, and perhaps a little local wildlife. So I'll fill in some of the silence with a little voiceover and a few details of this job. Before I get too far, I'd like to give some thanks to Giraffe Video Productions, which helped me out on this guy. If you're in need of some crack video services, reach out to these guys and I'm sure they'll treat you well. This house was a triple-decker, which is common in this part of the country. For those of you not familiar with them, there are 3 family houses on each floor. They all look very similar to each other, but each is different. I lived in a triple-decker for a short time, and so did each of my parents when they were growing up. And I've also done work in many triple-deckers and appreciate the variety in them. They're typically around 20 feet wide, maybe 60 feet deep, making the footprint around 1,000 to 1,200 square feet, which means each floor is the size of a small house in this area. You know, 1,000 square feet is a big enough house to raise a family, or at least it was for the generations before the 1970s or so. And there are 3 floors, and the layout of each floor is typically the same. They usually have a staircase running up the front and the rear of the building, and each floor has access to it. And the rear stairway usually also has access to the basement. Each unit can be 3 bedrooms with a bathroom, living room, dining room, and kitchen, of course. Being 3 stories, they're around 40 feet tall, making them pretty tall for their width. They sort of look the proportions of a giant shoebox on its side, if you catch my meaning. These houses came into their own sometime around World War I and seemed to have a short run, not being very popular by World War II. At least some of them were balloon framed, meaning that the walls were made of studs that ran from the foundation to the roof. In this case, they would have been 40-foot long 2x4s, which is unheard of today. And to be honest, I've often wondered how one would frame such a house. I mean, how exactly do you build and raise a 40-foot high wall? I imagine they used post and beam barn raising techniques. But anyway, I digress. Around here, often a family living in the first part of the 20th century would pony up funds to get their piece of land and build a house like this. Perhaps 2 brothers. Each would occupy a floor on their own, and they would rent out the remaining unit, or perhaps house their parents or grandparents in the 3rd unit. And it wasn't unusual at all for cousins to be growing up in these houses. This particular building was constructed sometime in the 1920s and was owned by the same family for most of its existence. In the beginning of the 21st century, it was purchased by a different entity, and sometime thereafter suffered a fire. The fire itself destroyed about 15% of the building, and putting out the fire damaged about 50% of the building. Hence, the house was totaled by the fire and the efforts to put it out. Cause of the fire, as I understand it, was indeterminate and blamed on electrical issues, but in my experience, when they can't blame something specific like a cigarette or a faulty appliance on a fire, they just attribute it to electrical causes. Well, so much for the history of this house and triple-deckers in general. Let's get back to the project at hand. One challenge of this particular house is that it's about 20 feet from the building on the right as you're viewing it, and maybe 40 feet away from the building on the left. That doesn't leave a lot of room for anything to fall away from the house, so the trick to this guy running the crane picker is to be extra careful, to have all the pieces pulled or fall inward toward the house itself. So here the crane picking machine is slowly and carefully pulling the pieces of the house down. The idea is to pull it toward the machine in a way where the house will slowly collapse in a controlled manner. Some parts pull away easy, other parts crumble, but some pieces stubbornly hold on. The operator has to patiently tease these parts away without causing a potential hazard. He's good at it, and has obviously done it before. As the pile of rubble builds, he can pick it up with a claw and move it to a more suitable location. The boom on the crane is about 50 feet long or so, and the claw on it can turn, twist, and articulate through a huge range of motion. making this a pretty amazing machine. So you might be wondering what it takes to demolish a building like this. Well, in short, you need some pretty big equipment, or at least big equipment in the residential world. And these machines are very expensive. Brand new, they can be $100,000 or more. And the trucks and trailers that move them around are also similarly priced. Not to mention you have to have a place to keep this equipment when it's not in use, and many communities around here don't want equipment like this on their roads after 5 p.m. and they don't want them visible while they're being stored. So you can have them on the job site for a short term, but often this equipment is garaged some lot 20 to 40 miles away when it's not in use. And of course the project has to pay to have these machines transported to and from the job site. It's not inexpensive to hire guys with these machines, but if they know what they're doing, and in my experience they usually do, then you get a lot of work done very quickly. I mean, this house was reduced to rubble in less than a day. This house is in one of the wealthiest states, actually a commonwealth, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So we have to pay more to have a job like this done than probably anyone viewing this video. And what do we pay for? Well, we pay dearly for trash disposal, because my state doesn't want it. They want someone else to take our trash, so this house had to be trucked over an hour and a half away to a different state for disposal. I'm not sure how legal it is to transport trash across state lines, but shh, don't tell anyone. Kind of reminds me of the trash barges that sailed from New York City years ago. They made headlines because New York City didn't want their trash, and they had a tough time for a while finding some other states to take it. As you can imagine, the regulations surrounding my disposal of this rubble and the costs associated were not insignificant. This house turned out to be on the order of 1,000 yards of debris, and when I say a yard, I mean a cubic yard. And for reference, the container for a tractor trailer holds around 100 cubic yards. Obviously the water has to be shut off to the house, along with the electricity and natural gas. The house was inspected for asbestos, home heating oil, all of which had to be documented. The fire department, as you can see here, is involved hosing water on the activity to keep the dust down, and of course there's a police detail to help with safety and with traffic. And you know, you'd be surprised how many people will get up close and personal to watch something like this. They even get into the work areas, and the workers and the police have to shoo them away. This community requires the entire house to be removed, including the foundation and slab. You're not allowed to just bury debris like you could in decades gone by. Then the hole has to be filled in with clean fill. So part of the challenge is obtaining a couple hundred yards of fill. People in this industry try to find a place to move fill, since it's kind of hard to store. When they excavate and have a pile of fill, ideally they want a place to dump it that very same day. And this is why there's a pile of dirt kind of obscuring the camera. We had a line on some fill and seized the opportunity to grab it while the grabbing was good. Well, that's all I have for this one. As always, I appreciate you coming by, checking out what I have. Hope you got something out of this video. I thought it was kind of cool myself. If you got a comment, please leave it. You know I love to read them. And like and subscribe if you don't mind. And as always, keep your eyes out for the next one.